Excerpt from Notebook 3, Record Store. Let us go down a trip to memory lane, specifically the summer of 2002, when A was finally kicked out of school. His dad had always been negligent, as you know, so every day was party time at his house, as you also know. Truly, this was a glorious time. This was the summer of Sister Zero, of the convent, of the arcade incident. This was the summer when Kay got caught and suspended for the mess she made in the boiler room. This was the summer when B tried to stop smoking like 12 times and failed consistently. Coincidentally, this was also the summer when B got very dark in terms of music tastes, and we all had to put up with it. Remember all that shit he played in the car when we all drove down to the coast? I mostly remember Swans. He was huge on Swans. This is how we started going to Name's apartment. You know, he runs a little record store out of that place. Guy's the textbook definition of an audiophile. Reminds me of the guy from Ghost World, the movie. B was looking back then for a vinyl of the Swans live album. The title had castration in it. I don't remember too well. I was never into things like that. I don't find music of that type cathartic, even if I have professed my love for Suicide, the band, not the act, several times with great enthusiasm. Anyway, the first time we went there, it was fairly innocuous. It was just me and B, one Friday after school. I think we also asked Kay to come with us because we wanted her to fucking explain what she had been doing in the boiler room. But back then, she had holed herself up in her room, poring over her books. You know how she is. She needs her space. She's weirder than all of us put together, which is saying a lot. A lot. Anyway, the guy's apartment was tiny, and it was made to seem tinier by the fact that it was lined with shelves which were themselves lined with records. And other than that, there were piles of cassettes, mostly bootlegs and mixtapes, and there were also at least 5 different record players and musical paraphernalia that I'm not enough of an expert on to comment confidently on. And there was practically no furniture, and for some reason there were porcelain bowls strewn about. Guy was big on cereal, I guess. He opened the door and he was stubby and unkempt and wearing a Captain Beefheart t-shirt. He didn't have much in the way of social graces and quietly invited us in. He offered us coffee. I said no. He said yes. You know how he is. He never refuses a cup of coffee, even if it's laced with hemlock. B and the guy started talking about music, and I felt like I should be part of the conversation as well. They started off on the points that we all had in common. Joy Division, Monster Magnet. We got into an argument over whether NYC Ghosts and Flowers was really bad or just bad. Then I started to zone out when the two of them started talking about bands and movements that I didn't even know existed. I remember the names Syzygy, Baroque Hell, and Spiritual Masters of Shangri-La. I zoned out. I remember at some point they mentioned a record called Baby Sex. The name stuck with me for obvious reasons, which I'm pretty sure is by the Residents. Anyway, I ended up falling asleep on the couch where I had settled. Afternoon sunlight, the time when all the kids are coming home and you're being lazy, listening to crackly AM radio and procrastinating over homework, that kind of stuff gets me woozy. I woke up abruptly when one of the guy's ferrets jumped into my lap. Did I mention the guy had a bunch of pet ferrets? They all had names like Patsy Cline and Howlin' Wolf. It was cute. I noticed that B and the guy had moved into the kitchen, which is tiny and adjacent to the living room. They were talking in hushed tones about something. At this point I realized that it was already dark outside. I glanced at my watch, and it was 7:30, so I called out to them and their conversation stopped abruptly. The guy almost dropped the beer he was holding. They both stared at me as if they had heard a disembodied voice or one of their ferrets talk. I guess they had forgotten I was there. B could really get into music when he wanted to say nothing of the other guy. So we said our goodbyes. I hurried the whole thing along, and B left with the record he wanted. I remember it now. It's called Public Castration is a Good Idea. Quaint title. He put it in the back seat and we drove back. He dropped me off at my place. He was playing something really soft and tender on the way back. I think it was Johnny Mitchell. She's a favorite of mine. First time I heard something like that playing in his car all summer. On the way back I had to ask him what they had been talking about with the guy all the time. All in all, we had been there for like 3 hours, and he said nothing. Just music and trivial shit. He's an interesting guy, but a little weird, and I agreed and didn't pursue things further. He dropped me off, and I went to sleep because, for some reason, I was unholy tired, despite having done nothing but sleep for the past few hours. The next day, B didn't show up at the regular place, which was weird because it was a Saturday. I called his cell phone, but it apparently had no batteries. I called his phone number and his mom answered. She said that B was in his room. I could hear little name crying in the background, back when he was just a baby. Apparently B had been studying. Ha. That day I was with A and T, and we both called bullshit on that, because it's B. He doesn't study for tests. He just wings it. We decided we would march over to his house and see what was up. His mom opened the door for us. She looked a bit distressed, but then again, B's mom has never been a big fan of B's friends. She is nice and polite though, and she offers us cookies, and that's good enough for us. B's sister was playing Mario or something in the living room, and the door to B's room was closed. We knocked, and he finally opened. B looked like he hadn't slept. There was an unlit cigarette dangling from the corner of his lips. He had that hilariously spotty attempt at a beard he got when he forgot to shave, and bags under his eyes. He looked at us as if it made no difference who we were, and let us in. This was when we realized that B's record player was playing the new Swans record, and it wasn't making a sound. B had a nice used record player he got at a really good price. It worked really well for what it was. A tried to play around with it, and B told him to be careful. T just grabbed a magazine and sat down to read. She was out of it that day. I think she was still mad at B for what she did to I. So we just sat there in silence for a minute or two. A and I were mostly waiting for B to offer up an explanation. T was in her own world. B raised up his head and was practically falling asleep in his chair. He was about to talk when we heard this unearthly scream from hell coming from the record. The speaker sprang to life, and out of it came this hellish sonic torture that blasted the room to full volume for all of 4 seconds. Then it stopped, and everything was silent again. B's mom stormed into the room, incredibly angry, wanting to know what that was. B sheepishly apologized, said it was a malfunction of the system. Wouldn't happen again. She gave us all a disapproving look and shut the door. Really, we don't look weird, so parents usually like us. But when you spend as much time around us as B's mom did, you learn to roll your eyes at everything we do, I guess. B started to spill the beans at this point, but not before hooking a pair of headphones to the record player and disconnecting the speakers to spare us any further torture. He said that he had talked to the guy who sold him the record, and he had told him that this was some sort of special first issue of the record. Apparently it was recorded live at a different venue than the one from the official version of the record or something. It was a pretty nerdy distinction, but apparently B was so excited about that notion that he played it the second he got home last night. The problem is that the record has been playing all night, and it doesn't make a sound except for periodic outbursts every hour or so. Apparently like the one we had just witnessed. At this point, I felt a horrible headache coming on. Well, fuck that, I said. It's probably scratched beyond recognition, or the guy conned you. Take it out and we'll go bitch at him right now. Get your money back, I said. But B shook his head. He explained further. Apparently he had been listening to the record all night on headphones, so as to not disturb his family. And the record is not damaged at all. It's just different. He nervously lifted the headphones up and offered them to me. I gave him a blank stare, then I put them on. First I only heard the usual vinyl cracks and pops. Then I realized there was music playing, but it was playing incredibly softly, like it had been recorded from miles away. From what I understood, this was Swans all right. I listened for about 30 seconds. Then there were other sounds. Like I think I could hear something like a wood chipper in the background, but B took the headphones back and put them on the floor. He explained to me that the outbursts, the extremely high-volume screams coming from the record, were unpredictable. That's why he couldn't listen to it continuously. You had to crank out the volume all the way to hear the music at all. And if one of those high-volume sonic blasts came at you through the headphones at full volume, that was it. You'd go fucking deaf or damage your eardrums beyond repair. Listening to the record for any long stretch of time involved putting yourself at risk of that. A and myself listened to the story with moderate interest. T was still out of it and would continue to be out of it for the rest of the day. In fact, it won't even make a difference to the story if I stop mentioning her. You know her. She's stubborn. When she's mad at someone, she doesn't acknowledge their existence. She and B wouldn't really make up until months later. B looked at our reactions as if he expected them, but then he looked at us and leaned closer, as if to tell us the punchline. The thing is, he said, I remember this word by word, that this isn't a Swans record. This is a list of places being recited repeatedly. I didn't really react. So, aside from being a dangerous piece of shit, it wasn't even a Swans record. It was some random bootleg, probably by some random band that never got anywhere. I said fuck it, and put the headphones on again. I strained my hearing to make out the lyrics. The singer, who was definitely not Michael Jura, or whatever his name is, was indeed screaming out locations of places. Places in our city. Record stores. When I confirmed this, the street names, the locations, everyone looked at me weird. Suddenly this became interesting. This had either been recorded by a native of our city, or this was simply inexplicable. But my hearing isn't so great. I couldn't make out most of what was being recited. Back then we were bored, and there was nothing else interesting going on. Kay was still cooped up in her house with T and B, and not addressing each other directly. The whole group was tense, so we decided we were going to find out what that guy was saying. So we decided to call up the guy with the best ears. That would be N. Remember back then? We weren't really friends with N. We had conversations every once in a while, but I guess he was a bit too cool for us or something. He wouldn't be a part of the group until a year later or so. It was kind of funny how much he got into the whole thing, and how fast. So the next day we called up N, asked him to hang out and get a couple drinks. He agreed, and we were at the store where we always did our requisite non-ID drinking. We casually and briefly summarized the story for N. He was fascinated by the whole thing, but, as he told me later, he didn't really believe us at the time. He was mostly humoring us because, remember, they had sort of kicked him out of the cool kids group at school for being gay. So he kinda turned to us for a new group of friends. It's true, he told me all of this. Anyway, we went back to B's house. The record was still playing. Now we warned in about the thing with the sudden blasts of super loud music. He seemed unimpressed by our somber warning. Again, because at the time he didn't believe us. He put the headphones on and we gave him a paper and pencil. The rest, of course, is well-recorded history. That episode with the record is how N's list of in-the-know record stores in city was composed. Of course, back then, we only had the names and locations. In wrote them all down on the paper, scribbled them, really. And then when the thing started looping, he put them down. With a half-bewildered and half-amused look, he said, "That's all." And I am not shitting you when I say that not more than 1 second passed after "that's all" then the record emitted the most brutalized, awful scream. It was like a wave of metal crashing into a sea of metal, with a torturous people's screams over it. It was like a tower of church organs stacked up on top of each other. It fucking blew out B's headphones. We all stood there in shocked silence. In was slack-jawed. It's a funny image now, but back then I felt bad for him, because we had used him and put him in danger. He's forgiven us for it now. We just stood there in silence, with the list in hand. And well, the record never stopped making that horrible sound as far as I could tell, except B's headphones were shot. He lifted the cartridge and took out the record. It was scratched all over. A grabbed it and broke it in two in a moment of righteous fury. Of course, that list would lead to tons of other stuff. The expeditions, the midnight chases, the run-ins with the doctor, as we discovered which stores were safe and not safe and never safe. But that came later. Right after that happened, we, B, N, T, and A, and myself, drove right the fuck back to this audiophile fuck's apartment, wanting a series of explanations. During the drive there, we got in up to speed on the whole thing. That this is where we had bought the record, that B originally thought it was a Swans live record, and that we tended to get into weird shit. The official term wouldn't appear until later. Like this, unnervingly often. He was still amused, but I think he was also a little scared. By the time we got to the guy's place, it was nighttime. We stormed up the steps to the 3rd floor where the guy's apartment was. This was a somewhat abandoned building, by the way, in the somewhat shitty part of town, and the whole scene was a little perturbing. But anyways, A, who always takes the lead when shit is expected to go down, knocked on the door impetuously, and nobody answered. He kept knocking for like a whole minute. T started complaining that it was cold, and in this part of town they might try and jack a car, and that we should go. Then, suddenly the door budged, and it opened, abruptly and unexpectedly, and we entered the apartment. There was only one light. One. A naked light bulb hanging from the center of the living room ceiling, barely illuminating anything, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the ferret scurrying about in the dark. But the guy, the bastard, was nowhere to be found. But all his stuff was still there. This is when T noticed that
Something had been spray painted on the far wall in big, fat letters. Welcome, forever open business, just for pre-admitted clients. Please pay exact amount in cash. Leave in sync. Thank you. Have a nice day. These 3 lines had been sprayed onto the far wall. We had to combine the illuminating power of all our cell phones to read it.
This is when it hit us, that we realized that this guy was gone for good. For some reason we were certain of it. Mostly everyone was just weirded out, but B looked knowing. And then he spilled the rest of the story. Apparently the guy was part of some underground circle of really obsessive record collectors in the city. Apparently that day when B and I had originally met in the apartment, B had sort of taken an entrance exam with the guy, where he asked him about music, and if he answered enough obscure shit correctly, he gained entrance into the circle, which presumably implied access to lots of rarities and oldies. But B also mentioned that this guy was moving soon, and he'd let him know about his new address. The guy has never gotten into contact with B, by the way, nor has he ever come back to his apartment. We still use it sometimes. We go there, surprised that nobody else has robbed it clean by now. We browse the shelves, we find a record we like, and we pay the exact amount in cash on the kitchen sink. We feel a little silly because there's a rather big pile of money building up there. It's not like the money disappears overnight or anything cheesy, but we feel like we should pay. T wants to take one of the ferrets home, but that doesn't feel right to us either. I guess they're like cats. They find their own food wherever. And to this day, this is the only store we consider safe. Notes. Well, that last story took a long time, although In apparently became a part of my brother's circle of friends. I don't remember anything about him, nor did I know that my brother knew anyone who perished in the 2006 fire mentioned on this list.